Dyke Whittington. Once upon a time, there was a poor boy who was called Dyke Whittington. His mother and father were dead, and he had no one to care for him. Dyke lived in a small village in the country. He tried to work for his living, but he could not always find work to do. Dyke was very poor. His clothes were thin and ragged, and sometimes he had very little to eat. In those days, people did not often travel far from the village in which they lived. Dyke's village was a long way from London. When the village people talked of London, they spoke of it as a wonderful place. They said that all the people in the city of London were rich. They even said that the streets of London were paved with gold. Dyke listened to these tales as he longed to go to London. Dyke thought that if he went to London, he would be able to pick up gold from the streets. Then he would become rich and need never feel cold or hungrier again. Dyke made up his mind to go to London, although he had no idea how far it was. He made his few clothes into a bundle and tied the bundle to the end of his stick. Then he set off to walk along the road to London. Dyke walked a long way, but he did not reach London. Just as he was beginning to feel very tired, a hire cart came along the road. The driver stopped the cart and said to Dyke, "Where are you going, my lad?" "I'm going to London, sir," replied Dyke. "Then jump up beside me," said the driver, "and I'll take you to London." When they drove into the city of London, Dyke gazed about him in wonder. First, he was very surprised to see how many people there were in the streets. He had never seen so many people before in all his life. He was also amazed to see all the fine churches, shops, and houses. When Dyke had got over his first wonderment, he began to look for the streets that were paved with gold. Nowhere could he find them. It grew dark and Dyke was tired and hungry. He had nowhere to sleep, so he curled up in a doorway and went to sleep there. Next morning, Dyke tried to find work for himself. He walked along the streets after street, asking people for work, but no one had a job to offer him. When night came, Dyke was so weak from hunger and tiredness that he sank down on the nearest doorstep. Now it happened that this house belonged to a rich man named Mr. Fitzwarren. He was a merchant who made his money by selling things to people in other countries. Mr. Fitzwarren's cook found Dyke on the doorstep and was angry. "You lazy boy," she cried. "What are you doing there? Get up from my master's doorstep." Poor Dyke tried to rise, but he was too weak. At that very moment, Mr. Fitzwarren himself arrived home. Mr. Fitzwarren was a kind-hearted man. He spoke gently to Dyke and listened to his story. "If it's work you want," he said, "you can work in my house for my cook. You will have plenty to eat and a bed to sleep in." Dyke was very happy that he could hardly find words with which to thank Mr. Fitzwarren. Dyke's happiness did not last long. He soon found that the cook was an unkind woman. She was always scolding him, and sometimes she used to beat him. Mr. Fitzwarren had a daughter named Alice. She was kind like her father, and she knew that the cook was cruel to Dyke. Alice took pity on Dyke and forbade the cook to hit him. This made things easier for Dyke, although he still had to work very hard. Dyke's bed was in a cold attic at the top of the house. This attic was overrun with rats and mice. At night, as Dyke tried to sleep, the rats and mice ran over his bed. He could not rest. If only I had a cat, thought Dyke. She would be a friend to me, and she would chase away the rats and mice. All the money that Dyke had in the world was 1 penny. Next day, Dyke went to the market with his penny in his pocket. There he saw a woman holding a cat in her arms. "Please, will you sell me your cat?" Dyke asked the woman. "I'm not sure that I want to sell her," said the woman. "She's a grand cat for catching mice." "That's just what I need," said Dyke. He pleaded so hard that at last the woman agreed to sell him her cat for a penny. From that day, Dyke's life became happier. He loved his cat and looked upon her as his friend. At night, he slept well because his cat chased away all the rats and mice. Now, Mr. Fitzwarren had many ships that sailed to distant lands. One day, Mr. Fitzwarren called all the servants together. He told them that one of his ships was ready to sail. Everyone was allowed to send something with the captain to be sold in a faraway country. That way, they could make some money. "Do you want to send something on my ship?" Mr. Fitzwarren asked Dyke. "I have nothing in the world except my cat," replied Dyke. "Then you must send your cat," said Alice. Poor Dyke did not really want to part with his cat, but to please Alice he agreed. Dyke missed his cat and wished he had never sent her away. Once more he could not sleep at night because of the mice running over his bed. Dyke was so unhappy that he made up his mind to run away. Early on morning, he crept out of the house before everyone was awake. Dyke had not gone far when the bells of Bow Church began to ring. The bells seemed to be singing this tune to Dyke. "Turn again, Whittington. Lord Mayor of London, turn away again, Whittington, thrice Mayor of London." "If I am to be the Lord Mayor of London," thought Dyke, "I will turn again." So before anyone missed him, he turned back to Mr. Fitzwarren's house and let himself in. Meanwhile, on the ship, Dyke's cat was making herself very useful. The ship was overrun with rats and mice. Dyke's cat was a fine rat catcher, and she soon killed hundreds of them. After sailing for many weeks, the ship came to a far country. The king of the country invited the captain to come to the palace. A wonderful meal was prepared for the king and queen and the captain. Many servants carried in the food on gold and silver dishes and set it in front of them. But before anyone could take a bite, hundreds of rats rushed into the room. The servants tried to drive them back with big sticks, but it was no use. In no time at all, the rats had eaten all the food. The captain was astonished by this sight. He turned to the king and asked, "Why do you put up with these rats, your majesty?" "There is nothing we can do about it," replied the king. "Every time we sit down to eat, it is the same. My wise men have tried to make spells, but they have not managed to get rid of the rats." "Then why don't you have a cat?" asked the captain. "A cat?" said the queen. "What is a cat?" So the captain described the cat. Then the king and queen told him that there was such animal in their country. "I would give half of my kingdom for a cat," said the king. The captain went back to his ship, picked up Dike's cat, and returned to the palace. He arrived just as the meal was being served. The rats were beginning to eat the food on the gold and silver dishes. The cat jumped out of the captain's arms. She killed dozens of rats, and the rest fled in fear. The king and queen were astonished and delighted. "Oh, captain, we must have that cat," cried the queen. The king agreed to buy Dike's cat. The queen asked to see what else the captain had for sale. The sailors carried to the king's palace all the goods they had to sell. The king and queen bought everything. For Dike's cat, the king paid 10 times as much as he had paid for all the other things put together. He gave the captain a casket full of gold and jewels in exchange for the cat. When the ship got home, the captain went straight to Mr. Fitzwarren and told him the news. Mr. Fitzwarren sent a servant to the kitchen saying, "Ask Mr. Whittington to step up here, please." Dike thought the servant was making fun of him. Mr. Fitzwarren handed Dike the casket of jewels. "You are now a very rich man, Mr. Whittington," he said. "Your cat has made your fortune." Dike could hardly believe this good news. He thanked Mr. Fitzwarren and the captain with all his heart. Miss Alice was very happy to hear about Dike's good fortune. "First, you must buy yourself some new clothes," she said. Dike did so, and very smart he looked in them. Dike was now a wealthy man. When he asked Mr. Fitzwarren if he could marry his daughter, Alice, Miss Fitzwarren was glad to give his consent. Some years later, Dike became Lord Mayor of London. Indeed, he was Lord Mayor of London 3 times. So the Bow Bells had been right when they said to him, "Turn again, Whittington, Lord Mayor of London. Turn again, Whittington, thrice Mayor of London."